This time on Poll Hub, Alabama shakes. At least it does for Democrats and the non-Steve Bannon wing of the Republican Party, after the special election there gave Alabama a Democratic senator for the first time since 1992. So why did the oh-so-popular RCP average of polls have the Republican Roy Moore winning? Well, Amy Walter is here to help us break that down. And then we're going to talk to her about what all this winning by Democrats around the country over the past few months means for 2018. For Republicans, for Democrats, for Donald Trump, for all of us. A lot to discuss, so let's get started. And hi, everybody. I'm J.D. Depper, Director of Innovation here at the Marist Poll.
And I'm Lee Maringoff, Director of the Marist College Institute for Public Opinion.
And I'm Barbara Carvalho, Director of the Marist Poll, and we are here in the Hancock Center at Marist College in wonderful Poughkeepsie, New York.
Chilly Poughkeepsie, New York.
Crisp. We like to say crisp.
Yeah, it's cold. Okay, so Amy Walter is here. She's the national editor of the Cook Political Report. And it's great to have you here, Amy, because we are sitting 24 hours after the election in Alabama, which pretty much everybody, not just in politics, but like cab drivers, are asking people about. I saw a tweet from a political reporter about that. Let's start from scratch here. Your take on what happened in Alabama.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me up here. I love this view here, normally from the Hancock Center over the river. It's beautiful. It's probably frozen or close to being frozen at this point. I know I am, if the river is not, but it's beautiful. I always love coming up here, and I will put in a plug for the Marist Poll. I think you all do great work. And on top of it, you're good, nice people, and that should be a positive. Wow. Just right there.
We
just
be
good.
Pollsters are people too.
Pollsters are people that are real humans.
Yes, Citizens United
yes.
is now covering pollsters, I see. Well, and Amy, thank you so much for schlepping up from Washington today as well.
So on the polls, though, it's interesting because we are a poll, and the RCP average, as we mentioned in the open, had Roy Moore winning by 2.2 points. There were polls all over the map.
There were.
The Fox News poll, the most recent one, had Jones winning by a big margin. Monmouth had a tie. Other polls had, Moore winning, as we discussed. What's your take on that, and how does that affect the coverage of races like this by people like you covering national politics on a national scale?
So this race was unusual in that you had a number of national organizations polling a state race in an off year with unusual circumstances, right? And most of these, to say the very least, and most of these are folks who've never been in this state.
And it was a special election.
And a special election, which we know, right, that turnout model and all those things are going to be really challenging. Normally what would happen in a traditional midterm or off-year election, even a special election, is you talk to the campaign specifically, which was what we do, because their pollsters do understand what's going on and have a very different priority as they're doing their polling than the national pollsters do.
And they have more money to do it, too.
Some of them do, generally. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But they also understand their job in doing the poll is not to figure out who's up and who's down and what the margin is and how can we characterize this race. It's how do we get to victory? What do we need to get there? And so my colleague Jennifer Duffy, who covers the Senate, she spends a lot of time talking to people who are actually involved in the race, and it was pretty clear from what we were hearing that the race was basically on the knife's edge, right? That this was very, very close. A number of things needed to break Jones's way, namely black turnout needed to be significant. There needed to be some defection from Republicans. We talk a lot about these college-educated Republicans who have been, since 2016 have been sort of disaffected Republicans, turned off in some ways by Trump. Certainly Roy Moore, they were turned off even more by his behavior. And they knew that, the Moore himself created something of an anomaly. So I think we knew going into it that this wasn't going to be a blowout, that this was going to be a very, very tight race, and that what the polls, the national polls, were showing was that the reality for so many of these folks is how difficult it is to model in an off year in a strange place with strange circumstances. And I don't think that's the same as, for example, going in and seeing a national poll, right? Mm-hmm. You all, whether it's Marist or Quinnipiac or the NBC, what we're seeing is some real consistency in the national polling on the president's job approval ratings, in the congressional ballot, in perceptions of the parties. So I don't think what we saw in Alabama is an indication that, oh my gosh, polling's all over the place and these people don't know what they're doing, as much as you had a lot of people in a state that, well, quite frankly, they're not as well attuned to. And so they were making assumptions about the state and about turnout that if you were involved in the campaign, you might not be doing.
Now, the politics of it, what can we take away from that? I mean, let's go back to November 2016. The Clinton campaign looked at the electorate and said, we think there's something different here that is happening in terms of the suburbs around urban areas, among women who may be Republican but more moderate. And they targeted those groups, not successfully. However, it does seem that in Virginia, for the governor's race, which we saw recently, and in Alabama, that strategy may actually be coming to fruition.
Yeah.
What's your take on that? Is something changing here, or is it just this particular
I think
context?
I think what we've seen in the 2017 elections thus far, especially the House special elections, and now the governor's races in Virginia, New Jersey, and now, of course, the special election in Alabama, is a real enthusiasm advantage for Democrats. You guys have been picking up in your polling for a while in terms of the intensity of dislike for the president, shall we call it, has been...
Well, actually, yeah, his, let's see, the
it's
strong negative rating of the president, at least in the latest Marist poll, was at its highest this time.
And in the exit polls.
And the exit polls, even in...
The strongly disapprove of President Trump's job performance was, even in Alabama, exceeded his strongly approves.
Yeah.
So it's he's polarized, but he's also tipping in the negative direction.
That's right. And that intensity was breaking the other way in 2016, right? The yes, both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump were disliked, but the intensity of support for Trump was higher than the intensity of support for Hillary Clinton. I think that's an important thing to remember. I think the other piece of this is, you had a president who came in as a very polarizing figure, and a lot of voters, I would argue a lot of them, those suburban reluctant Trump voters, or maybe they were voters that didn't show up in 2016, women who said, or suburbanites, college-educated suburbanites who said, I really don't like that Donald Trump, but I can't vote for Hillary Clinton. They left it blank. Maybe they skipped it altogether, the race altogether. That now what they were doing in 2016 was saying, well, let's kind of give this guy a shot. All right. I don't really like him. I don't like his behavior. I don't like his temperament, but let's see what he can do. And now we are 9 months into this presidency, almost 10 months into this presidency, and it's pretty clear that the behavior that they saw in 2016 isn't changing. There is no presidential Trump. There is one speed of Trump. The tweeting and the divisiveness and the polarization has only gotten more intense. Instead of reaching out and saying, again, this is what always surprised me as a student of politics, you guys are as well, that if you were any other candidate that won an election by such a narrow margin, basically 70,000 votes over 3 key states, lost the popular vote, you're starting off as president with a job approval rating somewhere in the 40s, you would say, you know what I need to do for the next year? I need to broaden my base.
Yeah, not so much.
I got to broaden. That's what I'm going to do. Instead,
zero effort.
He's zero effort. He's actually doing the exact opposite, which is I'm only going to talk to my base, and then that base has been shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. And I think those suburban voters who were somewhat reluctant in 2016, maybe reluctantly supportive, or they were somewhat hopeful that Trump would be this certain kind of president, have now really soured on him.
He never does pivot.
No,
and we
there
don't
is
use
no-
that word anymore.
Before we go to a break, Lee, I just want to ask you about Alabama again in these polls. You've been in this for a long time, right? And we were talking about this as the polls were coming in last night as exit polls and all that. What happened there with these polls that were so all over the map?
Well,
I mean, as reporters,
yeah.
like Amy and I as reporters, I'm fascinated to find out what happened there and what you saw with your experience.
Well, I think a lot of it was what Amy talked about, this environment that the pollsters were dealing with, which was very, very challenging, to say the least, and there wasn't a lot of track record to go on. So there was a little bit more of shooting in the dark. I think that there was a difference in the pre-election polls, as it turns out, and not surprising to Barbara and me, between some of these IVR polls and some of the polls that are more probability, traditionally based, scientific, live interviewers calling people on landline and cell phones, which is how we do it, and still think that is the gold standard, the way of doing it. And if you look at the polls that seem to be more on mark, now they do it slightly differently, but the Monmouth poll, the Washington Post poll, and the Fox poll, which for reasons we might want to get into, we thought was actually a very good poll. They all were, had Jones, close or in front. And there was the IVR polls a lot that really had this more number, and that was really what I think was driving that real clear average, because they take everything and throw it into the soup, and you sort of end up with what you got.
And so what you're saying is that the IVR polls, because they don't get cell phones, you're probably not getting African American or younger voters in the same way that you would if you're only dialing landlines.
And I think they weight it to what they think an electorate will look like. But in this case, if they don't have a track record,
right,
the guesswork is a lot higher, and I think that's why they were off by even more. Sometimes the IVR stuff does mimic the scientific-based polls.
But also particularly in Republican primaries or with populations that tend to be more on landline. You make a perfect point, Amy, that they're missing a whole very large segment of the population that no longer have landline phones, so would not be accessible. And some of them do try to add in online, interviewing, but those again are non-probability panels, and so scientifically, statistically, I don't even know what to think of them, quite frankly, because there is no science to guide what those numbers mean.
Yeah. And also we know that where there's less diversity, where populations are more homogenous, it doesn't matter all that much the method, as long as you're getting a lot of them. But if you have a place in like Alabama, which we haven't talked about, clearly was not only diverse as a state, but within counties, which affected how the analysis of the vote was coming in. Certainly was very diverse, and that made it even more challenging, as if there weren't enough challenges.
So let's go to a break, and when we come back, we're going to drill you a lot harder here on this 2018 question, right? What this all means, because I think that's the day after Alabama. That's what everybody's asking right now. So we'll be back in a second.
Hi, I'm Mary Griffith, executive producer of Poll Hub. If you're enjoying this week's episode, and we really hope you are, check out our previous episodes and let us know what you think. Email your questions and feedback to PollHub, all one word, at marist.edu. You can also catch us on social media. Just search @MarisPoll on Twitter and MarisPoll on Facebook and Instagram. And of course, stay up to date with our new episodes by subscribing. That is wherever you get your podcasts. There's lots more Poll Hub still to come. Stay with us.
Okay, rejoining the discussion, and we're here again with Amy Walter. And Amy's visiting Marist College as part of our public opinion politics course. And she is now, of course, doing this podcast, but then we'll be having dinner and conducting a seminar with an eager bunch of students who may look a little tired, Amy, because this is finals week. and you may be it's between you and Santa Claus. You're the block. They get done with this class, and they can then move on to the holidays.
Hold on 1 minute. I am between them and Santa
That's
Claus.
correct. I'm sorry.
You didn't really make it easy
that
for her.
is-
That's tough.
Well, that's
All
why.
right.
Actually, I think they're really looking forward to this because
They
this
really
is
are.
a treat and quite a
it
present
really-
for all of us here.
Yeah, well, that
at,
is. It's
at
a-
Right,
Marist.
but still, I mean,
Maybe
fighting
it's-
Santa Claus, that's a tough call.
But anyway, so Amy is a graduate of Colby College, and you graduated summa cum laude, and I think that's certainly way up there on the scale. Very nice, very nice.
Thank
There's a
you.
few people nodding. They probably did well, too, at their colleges. I
Yeah,
last
not
did
me
not.
so much.
Not me. Thanks for the.
And as such, I'm
shout-out.
a
It
big
didn't happen.
fan of small liberal arts colleges.
and you're on the
I'm an
board.
evangelist. I'm just now off the
you're
board.
board.
But I was on the board for 6 years. Yeah.
You were the news director there. You've been with the Cook Political Report prior to that, and now I think you were a senior editor, I believe, and now you've rejoined Cook Political Report as their national editor. And you've been up to Marist before, and
Yes.
you know the routine. And then we've had Amy graciously has participated in two of our panels. Two of our panel discussions, including the most recent one, which was at the museum in Washington, D.C. Last spring. And so we are indeed, just delighted to have you here again. And we do appreciate because it's not around the corner. And so we want to talk now, I think, a little bit about 2018. And certainly that is the chatter today. And I think I guess I would begin by saying, Barack Obama, in the midterm elections did not go so well. And now the question...
2010, the first time around.
2010,
and
2014.
well, actually 14 too.
Yeah, so then the question becomes, are we seeing that Donald Trump can't deliver, it doesn't transfer from whatever he had to last year this time to what's coming up now in these special elections, what we've seen and what we're
Yep.
looking at in 2018?
Yeah, it's a great question. I have been in Washington and covering politics and involved in politics since 1991. So I have been through, 6 midterm elections? And 4 of them have been wave elections. So it was 94, 2006, 2010, 2014.
Yeah.
So this, in every case, the party in the White House lost one or both houses in those 4 midterm elections. So wave elections have now, for me, are more of the norm.
They're the new normal.
Than being sort of these crazy once in a lifetime outliers.
So is this now
So
the
this
blue
feels
wave that
like,
we're seeing?
So just being through so many of these now, this feels very familiar, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have a president that comes in, although he came in a very different way than we've seen before, right? He's unlike anything we've seen. But as I said earlier, you come in with, you're very polarizing, you have very high disapproval ratings, you have a very narrow base, and then you spend the first 9 months really only catering to that base, polarizing the electorate even more. It's not surprising to me to see that the energy right now in the country is on the Democratic side. We're seeing that in the special elections, Democrats overperforming where they normally should be in red districts. In blue states like Virginia, they basically doubled their performance. And then in a state like Alabama, where we have to be careful because there were a whole lot of other things
Yes.
going on. Obviously, had Roy Moore not been the Republican candidate, Democrats wouldn't have won there. But I think if you're a Republican and you look at this and you just say, well, Roy Moore is a terrible candidate, or if we had a better candidate, we'd be fine. I would be very worried if I were Republicans and I saw that intensity of turnout among African Americans and young voters and women and suburban voters. These are the kinds of people that didn't turn out in 2010. They didn't turn out in 2014. And quite frankly, they didn't turn out in 2016 either. They turned out for Barack Obama and nobody else. You guys know this better than anybody. The greatest GOTV motivator is hate. It's not love, okay? And so you can get a whole bunch of people turning out on the Democratic side, not because they think Democrats are these great, they have a great message or they have the best candidates, but because of their deep dislike of
Does
Trump.
this emerge from just the polarization, the inability in the last 10 years or so for government to function?
Yeah.
And so then you put your money on somebody and it doesn't work, and then we go the other way.
I think so. And I think this is where Trump had a real opportunity, when he got in. Look, as I said, he got in with being very polarizing. But for a lot of folks, they said, and again, just being a student of political science, he said, well, this is a really fascinating experiment. You have a president who has no political experience, but also no political affiliation. So he's not, quote unquote, owned by anybody. And he talked about that a lot in the campaign. I'm not owned by the donor class. I'm not owned by the political class. I can reshape Washington. I mean, every president comes in and says, I can reshape Washington, and they all fail. But it felt unique because really he did come from such a different place and had such a different perspective. And I think a whole bunch of Democrats, right around inaugural time, were still in sort of a Kubler-Ross state of denial, peace, kind of trying to figure out where to go. And their greatest worry was that what Trump was going to do was come in and really push this message, sort of a populist message, to bring on not just red state Democrats, but some other Democrats. He would come in talking about infrastructure, fighting the war on opioids, and wrapping that all into tax reform. But instead, the very first thing his administration did was the travel ban. And then it went boom from there, right? So I think that that is unique to him. What's not unique is your point, Lee, that the country has become, one, so polarized and so frustrated with the dysfunction that we seem to just go back and forth between this party didn't work, so I switched to the next party, to the next party. I also think, though, it is a symptom of the short-termedness, I don't know if that's really a word, but of the parties, that what they do is they say, look, we may get one chance in power, and when we have it, you got to just go full out on pushing your agenda. And it may lose us the next two elections, but we're going to at least be able to get our agenda accomplished. And so you just simply have the pendulum swinging all the way, one year to say these are parties and candidates that overinterpret. They see that they have a mandate, which they don't. They overinterpret it. They overreach. They lose. The next side comes in and says, you overreached and overinterpreted. Now we're going to do the same. And we kind of go back and forth.
No consensus building in the way it was.
Right. That's what we keep assuming, is at some point we got to get somewhere in the middle, right? You can't just have this pendulum going back and forth, but it seems as if we are.
Yesterday I woke up and I guess the conventional wisdom, if there is any more, was that the House was in play. Today I woke up and is the Senate now also in play?
Right. So
we have everything going.
So now
again.
everything. As I said, you look to 1994, look to 2006, and quite frankly, 2010 should have been the same, where the party in the White House lost both the House and the Senate. The only reason Democrats didn't lose the Senate in 2010 is that Republicans put up a bunch of, as my boss Charlie Cook calls them, exotic candidates.
A trend that has not ended.
It
if
has not
Alabama
ended.
Is any
That's right.
indication.
So Democrats need 3 seats to take control of the Senate. They're defending 25, including 10 in states that Trump carried, 5 in states he carried by double digits. But now they've checked 1 off their list, so now they're 2 seats away from a majority. Arizona and Nevada are very strong opportunities for them. Tennessee now is on the, I don't know, I would call it on the bubble, but it's certainly in the, it's now part of the playing field.
Because the
Corker,
Democratic candidate as well, right?
Right.
Former governor.
Former governor Bredesen, very well known. Now, granted, the last time he was on the ballot was very different time. Democrats could still win in Tennessee back then. And, we've seen past examples of Democrats bringing back oldies but goodies, whether it was Bob Kerrey in Nebraska or you brought, why am I blanking on in Indiana? By in Indiana, Evan By in Indiana. Yeah. So, that doesn't always work out. But the fact is they're going to play for a state that a year ago we never would have said was competitive. Of course, they got to hold a lot of tough states. But I think now it is certainly a plausible debate to have.
And I guess if you're in recruitment mode right now, this is occurring. Alabama occurred at just the right time for the Democrats.
Yeah.
But do the parties have a brand issue? I mean, not just the Republicans, but just in general, do parties really have a brand issue?
Well, I mean, what you're seeing now is really remarkable. I don't know what your number, I can't remember what your numbers were for Democratic, Republican job approval, but it's bad. It's in the 20s,
it's bad.
right?
The Republicans
20s.
are, I think, congressional.
Congressional
Republicans are
Republicans.
around 25, and congressional Democrats
Little
are
higher.
32.
30s.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Nothing to write home about.
no,
in either
nobody's
case,
happy
right?
about that.
Even lower than President Trump.
There we go.
Yeah.
And Americans, so they say, they don't like the parties. The parties themselves have become less influential. We saw that obviously in 2016, where the RNC and the quote-unquote establishment could do nothing to stop Donald Trump, and the quote-unquote Democratic establishment could do nothing to stop Bernie Sanders. He got all the money and that he needed without having the donor class on the Democratic side or the establishment on the Democratic side. So the parties have less power than ever. The parties are more disliked than ever, and yet partisanship is stronger than ever. So
Yeah,
you have to
interesting.
kind of explain. I think the easiest way to explain that is people are attaching to party as it's really more of identity than it is about the party and its policies or the party and its quote-unquote brand. It's just like
identity
you would
instead
say,
of ideology.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like saying, I'm going to wear my Maris sweatshirt, I'm going to wear my Colby sweatshirt, and I'm always going to cheer for my team.
Yeah,
and
it's
even
sports, right?
Once you get
Politics
to,
is
once you
sports
get to
almost.
the once you get to the general, but is this going to play out as a problem for either party or both parties in the primaries?
Oh, I think it does already. I mean, this is how you ended up with Roy Moore, right? Because I just go back not too far in time in covering politics when a majority leader of your party, the head of the Senate campaign committee of your party said, you need to get out of this race, they would do it. I remember when Tim Pawlenty was thinking about running for the Senate, and Karl Rove got up to Minnesota and was like, it's not your time. We got somebody else we want to run, and he didn't do it, right? This is where the parties had some influence and some power. So now what you're seeing is the power is really coming from either the grassroots, which is, again, we say, well, that's good, right? We want diversity. We want the voice of the people. But it's also Steve Bannon. It's also the billionaires who run super PACs.
Yeah, the money's not coming from the grassroots.
No.
I think the distinction there is that if the passion and the reason behind these candidates was their support among the grassroots, that would be one thing. You still have to have money, and the money is coming from often, or at least sometimes, hidden billionaires.
Some of it is.
with agendas.
Exactly. So some of it's that. Obviously, Bernie Sanders wasn't that. Right. And Roy Moore, what we've also learned is you can take this sort of celebrity status. He wasn't getting billionaire money.
No, he wasn't.
He can raise money because of what his status is. And so that's what I think the primaries are going to be fascinating, because this idea of like what the donor class is now has totally changed. If you're a celebrity, your donor pool looks very different than if you're a sitting United States senator, or if you are Oprah, or if you're, right?
Is Oprah running? Do you think she's running?
I mean, who knows? Let's do
So
it.
But we're
one of the
Let's see
things one of the things you guys do, and the Cook Political Report is best known for, is rating districts. R plus 16, R plus what? Are there? Is this like a period where you guys are having to really dig in and reassess a lot of let's take House races.
Yeah.
House districts. I mean, are a lot of them up for reassessment, or are we so gentrified gerrymandered,
right,
that they're really, even at this stage, there's really only a handful of districts that need reassessment?
No, it's a really good question. And look, the fact that the president's numbers are as low as they are, and the intensity is so strongly against him, combined with a generic ballot right now that has Democrats at, what do you guys have at, 51%?
Oh, that's a double-digit
difference. It's a double-digit difference. And, when you look at those things together, you say, well, wow, yes, the playing field is bigger than what the conventional wisdom would suggest, right? And a conventional wisdom says, take any district that Trump lost. Okay, that's a top target for Democrats. What I'm doing now is also looking at any district that Trump, maybe that he won, but won with less than 50%. All right, so you add Trump districts that he lost that are held by Republicans Trump districts that he won by less than 50% held by Republicans.
That's because there were third-party candidates like Jill Stein. And
there were
things like
third-party candidates, or people honestly skipped the top of the ticket.
Which happened in this last year in greater numbers.
In greater numbers, because you had a whole bunch of people who
hated everybody.
They hated everyone, and they said, I'm going to go and, I might vote for my House candidate, but I'm not going to vote. So that gets you a playing field of about 50 or 51 seats. And then you got to start thinking about this, which is, as I said, I've been in Washington a long time, and I've seen 4-wave elections. 2/3 of the Republicans in Washington have never been on the bad end of a wave election. Okay, they're almost all of them were elected in 2010 or later, so they don't know what it's like. And it's like having kids, right? Where you're trying to tell them all the time, like, you don't know what it's going to be like when this happens to you. Trust me, this is really bad. It's the hot stove moment, right? Don't touch the stove. It's really hot. Until they do, they're going to try it.
Yeah.
And you had a lot of Republicans right now who are saying, well, I know it looks really bad, but I have my own identity. I'm going to localize my race. I can raise a lot of money, right? Which is all fair, and some of them may survive it. But these are the kinds of years when people who either one are super cocky and think that they can't possibly be beat because everybody knows me and everybody loves me and I've been winning for the last many years, or people who don't understand that their district has changed underneath them. And there are a lot of those districts in Orange County, California, for example, that Orange County, of course, went for Hillary Clinton in this last election. Traditionally, it's been a really Republican part of the country. New Jersey's another really interesting place where you look at some of those districts in New Jersey that have been rock-solid Republican for years that went for Hillary Clinton.
They're white suburban. They're
exactly.
people who are no longer identified necessarily as Republicans,
That's
at least not Trump Republicans.
And they're also in blue states, which are also feel that they're being targeted.
That's right.
By this Congress.
By this Congress, and then if you combine that, the one element we haven't seen, and this goes to your bigger question though is important, that there still is a structural advantage that Republicans have, and this is where, to the question about reassessment and how do we kind of gauge how likely that Democrats are at getting those 24 seats. If you say, well, there's a wave building, and it's pretty clear that it is, how big does it need to be to get to 24? And a wave in 1994 of this size could take out 50 seats. But a wave this size with the gerrymandering and the self-sorting and the fact that so many seats now, they've been sorted out over the last 10 years, now maybe it only takes out 20 seats, right? So do you need a wave 2 times as strong as you would need in a normal year?
That's a really interesting way to look at it.
And then there's the other analogy is, yet we think these are real structural advantages, except they haven't really been tested yet. And that, it's like you build levees and you go there, they can withstand, up to a 100-year storm. And then you get the 100-year storm. And then, right, they don't hold. So that's really what we're looking for. But if Democrats go into 2018 with double-digit congressional ballot advantage and the president in the low 30s, it is hard to see that Democrats don't find 24 seats.
Okay. Well, just one other thing. You guys use a lot of polling to make your assessments. Is there anything that you'll be doing differently this time around? Good
question. The hard part for us is, especially in House races, there's very little public polling. So you're using a lot of the campaign polling and the campaign committee polling or super PAC polling. So some of that is, you have to be careful about that, understanding where it's coming from, and you're not going to get as much of it. Right? When you have 500 polls in Pennsylvania, it's easy to aggregate and throw out ones that you don't like. In House polling, you're not getting as many. And even in Senate races, you'll get a lot more, but the quality of it is not going to be as high as it will be for the presidential or the national polls. I think what I'm really doing this year is, you guys reminded me of this, as we look at the polls, especially going into the election, instead of looking at what the margin is, look at where the incumbent candidate is and whether they've moved at all. If they've started at 45% in 2017 and they're still at 45% in 2018,
That's a problem.
it's likely they're going to hit 45% on Election Day,
And that's
right?
a problem.
That's their ceiling. And instead of looking at, oh, well, they're up, 45 to they've been up by 15 points this entire time. Well, they've been under 50 for a long time.
And the unknown challenger may gobble up the undecided.
And so my assumption right now, again, especially if this environment looks like this a year from now, is undecideds are going to break against the incumbent party. And so if you have 10% undecided, I'm not going to give all that 10% to the incumbent. I'm going to give most of it to the challenger.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Lots of food for thought, and we have a classroom of students now who are going to partake of that dinner.
Different kind of food.
Different kind of food.
Well, both
Different
kinds of food.
Both kinds of
Real
food.
food and
We're
And brain
very,
food.
very happy to have you.
Brain food.
Yeah, very happy to have you here on podcast, and we look forward to your comments in class in a few moments.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you very much. That does it for Poll Hub, a production of Marist College and the Marist Poll, and it is produced by our wonderful executive producer, Mary Griffith.
If you like it, don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
Absolutely. Thank you, Amy.